Welcome, everybody, to Line by Line Through the Torah. I'm Rabbi Stephen Bars, and we are in the book of Exodus. I want to start off with a story, and you're going to see a tie into where we are. If you want to follow along in the Torah, we are in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verse 17. So, my grandmother, may she rest in peace, was a fantastic lady, a very big influence on me, and sweet as pie, tough as nails, and very English. Very English. She always claimed to be a Cockney, which by definition is this is my mother's mother, which by definition means you were born within the sound about bow bells. You know, the English are a very precise bunch of people, and everything has to have a name. I remember as a child going, I think it was the British Museum. I don't know if you can still do it anymore, but I was visiting as we did a school trip to the British Museum, and somehow we got in the bug collection, which was just massive. I mean, I was a little kid. It could have been 3 bugs, and it was probably big. I don't remember much about it. But what I remember about it was that I found it odd that every bug had a name, had to have a name on it. It couldn't be bug number 1, bug number 2, bug number 3. It had its own unique, interesting, complicated, probably Latin name. And I didn't understand. Something bothered me about it then, but I couldn't articulate it until I saw the Torah, which said that's what Adam did. The first thing Adam does after he's created, as opposed to before he was created, there's a little redundancy there. The first thing he does is he names all the animals, which is the first thing that God does after he creates the existence, is he names the things, names the light day, etc. Because and we are created in the image of God, and therefore Adam names, and the British all the more so are gonna name these bugs. They just can't leave them for, like, you know, this is the thing. I don't know what it is, but it's a thing. You know, but that's what we do. What kind of tree is this? It's an orange tree, an apple tree, an oak tree. We have to give it names. If we have to give everything names, we feel so like insufficient if we don't have a name for it, and which implies a much deeper consciousness, a much deeper need, is that we have to understand how things work. It's in other words, a name, like obviously when you name a tree, this is an oak tree, you're not doing anything because it doesn't tell you anything. Yes, when you say it's an apple tree or an orange tree, you're describing what it's going to do for you. Obviously an apple, but an oak tree is going to tell you nothing, you know, unless you want it for shade or something like that. But implicitly, a lot of these names have no use whatsoever. So, but why is it we feel that we need to name? Is because there is an implicit sense within, which reminds me, just a slight digression here. You know, Mary Poppins, there's this line in Mary Poppins. You ever seen the movie, the original movie? I think they did a sequel to the original Mary Poppins. Has this line where I think he's a bird or something like that. And the kids ask her, what do you call it? And she says, this idea that we give things names is silly. I call it by what it really is, by the name it comes with, and implying that she was able to talk to the animals and give it its real name. You know, which is my in joke. You know, there's this company you can go buy the naming rights to a star. You know, astronomy is one of the things where they gave up on actually giving things real names, which by the way, which is a fascinating thing, how this really kind of ties in, because by the way, it's the one thing the Torah says each does have a name. In other words, when you call a bug, you know, Charles III or something, when you give it a name, you really, it's silly because it doesn't mean anything. It's just a label because human beings again feel this need. We implicitly we have a sense that we should know what things are for, what they do, and naming is that it is expressing that because when you name something an orange or an apple, you're telling us what it does. So, but naming a bug is we have really no idea what it does. But rather than feel uncomfortable and admit such, we will just name it. But the stars, the Torah says, we say it in our prayers every morning. It's one of the King David's pointed out that the stars have names. Every star has its own name. Every star has its own name because each star has a particular purpose. I don't know what it is. You know, maybe that's the advanced rabbinic degree that I haven't taken yet. But if you find a rabbi who does, go learn from him. Right? That's somebody who's like really got his stuff. So so astronomy has given up, and therefore they just give them numbers. They just give them numbers. So, but there's this company that's selling the naming rights, you know, and my in joke is that this guy buys a name, and the whole point of it is you buy the naming rights for your wife. You know, it's her birthday. Look, honey, I bought you a star. You know, and like 300 years in the future is passed to the family, and then we discover life on another planet, and some other alien is going, what are you talking about? You can't name that star. That's my wife's star. And they and they go to court over, the war starts about who gets to name the star. I thought it was funny anyway. So wow, I really digressed here. So the names. So anyway, so the British Museum, the British Museum has names for all of these different things. So as a kid, so what's a Cockney, right? What's a Cockney? You've heard the expression Cockney rhyming slang. It's a defined area of London. Well, I shouldn't say it's a defined area. I mean, it's an area of London that's an amorphous kind of area. It's more of a region of a segment of London, of the city, but it's more of a cultural connection. There's actually a king and a queen, right? The Cockney king and queen. I think they call it the Pearly Queen. I think their name is. And when simpler times, it was far more rigid because people didn't move as much. Now I don't know if it really exists. But they had a culture and they have a slang to them and a linguistic accent. In the same way, you might say Wales, or you might say the South the Southern Americans, or you might say New Yorkers have an accent, but it was a distinct area in London. I'm going way off track here. So I'm getting to a point. So my grandmother, she claimed to be a Cockney, which was always in England is a bit of a disparaging term because it's like the bad part of London. And but she claimed this it was completely out of character to her because where she was born, if the definition is if you can hear the sound of Bow bells. Bow was a specific area in London, and it had a church, the Bow Church. And when the bells would ring, if you were born within the sound of those bells, you were classified as a Cockney. Okay, we're going to go a long way around telling you about my grandma. She was an ardent Zionist, right, from the get-go. Ardent Zionist. She was always going to Israel, and little kids, she would bring back, Jaffa oranges and little trinkets from Israel, telling us to go, and I had really no interest whatsoever. But when I got older, I decided to go. Long story short, here I am. My son lives in Israel. I'm very proud of that. I lived in Israel for a long time, 9 years. All my kids have been. It's fantastic, right? And she had a brother, my uncle Sid, my great uncle Sid, And he was drafted into the British Army and was serving in Israel at the time of the British mandate over Israel, over Palestine. And when he came back, he told my grandmother, his sister, this story. That's the introduction to the story. So, what's the story? So, the British were anti-gun, and it's still today. You're very hard to get a gun in England. Even the police still do not carry guns. So they're very anti-gun. And they tried to, every place they conquered, they ruled, they instituted their philosophy, right? That's why, for instance, Australia, New Zealand, I don't think India, drive on the wrong side of the other side of the road, right? Like the British do. So they imposed their British sensitivities wherever they went. So they're in Palestine, and what they would do is they would raid the kibbutzes, wherever they found Jews carrying guns. The problem was that the British weren't defending them against the marauding Arabs, so it was a bit of a problem. So this one kibbutz, they got a tip-off that they have guns and they're going to raid them. So my great uncle did a very brave thing. He went into the commanding officer and he said to him that if you make me, I'm Jewish, which is also a brave thing to tell the commanding officers. The British Army, the British in general, are not known for their love of Jews. They go both ways. So, and you're in the army. And he said to the commanding officer, if you make the Jews go, we're going to go AWOL. We're going to desert our posts, which in those days was a capital crime, let alone a corporal crime. He could have been thrown in prison for such a, literally. Right? At the end of the Second World War, Eisenhower killed American soldiers, shot American soldiers that went AWOL. At the end of the Second World War, right at the end, the last few weeks, I mean, it was the Germans were on fast defeat, but they weren't giving up. And the American soldiers, Allied soldiers, died, and that's one of the great tragedies. Is a soldier that died in the last week. I mean, can you imagine? What a shame. But they were. So they went AWOL. They just wouldn't. They were not AWOL. They just refused to go. I'm not going. I'm not going into that beehive's nest of Germans. But if they don't go, the war just drag on longer. So for refusing a command, Eisenhower shot American soldiers. I don't know how many. I think it's just one or two, but which is also terrible. But nevertheless, he had to make a point. So my uncle went into he said, if you make the Jews go, we're going to go AWOL. We're not going to raid a Jewish kibbutz. We're just not going to do it. So, very nervous, and set the commanding officer back a little bit. So the next morning when they woke up, there was a sign on the service desk, notice board, right? So English isn't my first language. My joke there. So the notice board, Jewish soldiers stay home, don't go, right? And here, that was a very brave thing to do. End of the war, British should go home. My uncle comes back, and he goes to sees his sister, my grandmother, and he tells her the story, thinking he's going to be a hero. And my sister gave him a talking to. And he says, "You fool! You should have taken the orders and tipped off the kibbutz, where they're going to raid. That's what you should have done." Now, how does that relate to our story in this week? Let's read it. So this is the beginning of the genocide that the Egyptian king wants to destroy the Jews. So what does he say? What does he do? Well, he's very smart about it, very subtle about it, And what he does is he figures out, listen, he goes to the midwives and he says to them, when the babies are giving birth, when the women are giving birth, if you see it's a girl, fine. If you see it's a boy, kill him. Right? Kill him. In fact, the Midrash says he gave them a way of knowing what baby it is in the womb and doing an abortion. The Midrash says that. But nevertheless, whatever it is, kill off the boys. And in that way, you slowly, it takes a number of years because you're going to slowly destroy the Jewish people. There's going to be no one left because the girls are going to have no one to marry. They're going to have to marry Egyptian guys. And that's the end of the whole story, which is assimilate out because the Jews are very, very big on the Jews. The Jews don't marry out. They stick to themselves. They're very isolated, independent bunch of people. And this will kill them. This is how we solve the whole problem. No battle, no fighting, no secretly under the cover, behind the scenes, set up the situation, right? Okay, simple, right? Okay, good. So now, but the verse says a very interesting thing. V'tirena hamelados et alakim, right? The Egyptians, the midwives, they feared God, and they didn't do like the king said, and they let the Egyptians, they let the women live, they let the babies live. So the Egyptian, the king calls the midwives. He says, what's going on here? I see the nurseries are filled with boys, right? What's going on? And they give an answer. They say, they say to the king, I'd love to help you out here, but these Jews, these are little fib, they're going to say, these Jews, they are like animals. They're like animals, Cows don't need midwives. Foxes don't need midwives. Birds don't need midwives. Jews don't need midwives. They're giving birth in the fields. We have a job, but it's just an official job. We really don't do very much. We pick up the kids after they're already done. These women are giving birth in the fields. We don't see them. Okay, so then the king goes to plan B, the whole thing, and he kills a lot of boys. It's terrible. Sets up police. Right, anyone's pregnant, kills the boys. It creates a much more difficult scenario for him. But nevertheless, that's what happens. So I ask you a question. If there's one thing, if there's one thing that gets everybody's attention, you see these notices, these headlines, boat capsize. Boat capsizes, 150 people dead. Right? It's tragic. Like 75 children. What's everybody else? Chopped liver? It's as though the children, the only thing, women and children, there's the only thing, children especially. It's the only thing. People are people. I don't understand the value of life more than is in a child than anybody else. But nevertheless, there is this sensitivity in humanity that children is a greatest tragedy when a child dies. I'm sorry, I don't appreciate it. I don't think it's mean. I don't think it's correct. All human life is equally precious. A child with the precious because he's going to grow into an adult. So the adult is not precious too. The thing that it's going to become is not as equally precious as the thing that it is. So you say to me, well, it's potential. Okay, so this is the yado is the realized potential. So that potential is good. It became something. I mean, if you say to me the potential of a computer or the potential of a tree or the potential of an animal of it, right, is also equal in value to what it becomes. If it has no value when it becomes something, if it's garbage when it becomes something, it's garbage is meaning before it became anything, and it's potential. But nevertheless, right? Humanity has this sensitivity that children are a different level. The babies are a different level. He went to the average person and said to them, I want you to kill a baby. I'll give you $100 million, $1 billion, kill a baby. Maybe you'll get some people to take you up, but a lot of people would just refuse. A lot of people, I'm not talking about you're threatening with death if they do it, if they don't do it. right? But a lot of people would refuse. And a lot of those people who refuse don't believe in God. So the Torah says that the midwives, they feared God and they didn't do it, and implying that if they didn't fear God, they would have done it. We're kind of that's just not that's not our experience. And remember, the whole way we learn in the Bible is to take what we think would happen, and that's really how you learn in life. What you think is going to happen, what you think is the reality, what you think is going to be, and match it against what actually happened. That gap is the lesson. That's a painful way to learn. Much easier, more meaningful, well, not more meaningful, necessarily more meaningful, but much easier and profound is to learn it from here, because it saves you an awful lot of heartache. So I would have thought you'd go to anybody, tell them to kill a baby, and they refuse. It has nothing to do whether they believe in God or not. The Torah is saying the reason the midwives didn't do it is because they feared God. Now, what on earth is going on? Because I don't think that's an incorrect assessment. I think a lot of people would refuse to kill babies. In fact, you see it in the news all the time that people stand up to vicious dictators and genocidal maniacs, and the Holocaust as well. These stories unfortunately repeated many times over. God should save us from such experiences. But and the people who stand up, sometimes they believe in God. I'm not saying it's total rule, but sometimes they don't. What is the Torah telling you, right? That the midwives. So you see, imagine for a minute that they didn't believe in God. Imagine for a minute. Let's play the scenario a different way. They didn't believe in God, right? And the king comes to them and he says to them, right, kill the babies. What would they do? So you see, fear of God. What my grandmother said to my great uncle was, you did the right thing, but you didn't fear God. You see, if they don't believe in God, the midwives still would not kill the little babies. That's true. But they would have run away too. In other words, the king comes and says, kill the babies, and they go, they refuse and skip town and they disappear. What would happen? The king would just get someone else to do the job. And therefore, through that means, the babies would die. What they did was they didn't do it, but they stayed in their jobs. And then they came up with some silly, some excuse, some pretense. And the king bought it, right? And therefore what? He gave up on the idea of killing the babies that way. He tried a different technique, which had a certain amount of effectiveness, but nevertheless, through that means, it did not. He gave up on. He did not succeed, and that's what my grandmother was telling my great uncle. Fearing God is not about doing the right thing. You don't need to believe in God to do the right thing, but you do need to believe in God to make sure that the right thing gets done. That's what fear of God is all about. It's not about that I won't do the wrong thing. I can't live with the idea that I killed a little baby. That's definitely a level. That's definitely something that's definitely noble. That's definitely the right thing to do. But what is fear of God is that the baby doesn't die. That's a different level. That is putting yourself out there to making sure an impact, an effect, a result does or doesn't happen. That's on a different level. That's what humanity, when it lives like that, right? When people think on those terms, that the right thing should happen or the wrong thing shouldn't happen, we have a very different world. where humanity lives to its fullest, where humanity shines. That's what we're shooting for, that we should all live. It's not about that we should be good people. We should all be good people for sure, 100%. That's the basic. But we should got to make sure, we've got to stand up to make sure that the right thing gets done. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again 3 o'clock tomorrow. Please share these videos. I love it when new people join. And any comments or anything at the bottom of this video, you'll see it there. Thanks again. See you 3 o'clock tomorrow.